This podcast is brought to you by UCAN. We've conditioned ourselves to think of sugar and stimulants as necessary tools of daily performance. These fuel sources produce fake energy highs and inevitable lows, driving feelings of fatigue, lack of focus, and the need to rescue the body from the crash. UCAN is different. Its unique time release profile allows for an extended energy supply that doesn't require a rescue mission and keeps your blood sugar stable, the key to better performance and health. I've been using UCAN for over a year now. I love the product, and I don't use it just for my workouts. I use it while I'm coaching, while I'm at Power Monkey Camp, running from station to station, and I even use it at home doing yard work or just to get throughout each of the days. You'll feel good longer and do things you didn't think were possible. UCAN just launched their new Pineapple Edge flavor. If you haven't tried it yet, I'd highly recommend it. We've got a code for you to pick up some of this particular product or any other products you've been wanting to test out or need to restock. Power Monkey podcast listeners can save 25% on UCAN by visiting ucan.co/PowerMonkey. Again, that's ucan.co/PowerMonkey and using the code PowerMonkey2022, capital P, capital M. One more time, that's PowerMonkey2022. Welcome to the Power Monkey podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have Jesse Burdick. Now, Jesse is one of the most highly sought-after coaches in the powerlifting world, having been an incredible powerlifting athlete himself, but he's closely tied to the CrossFit world as well, having been the SME for the powerlifting course for a number of years, an incredible resource for bringing the powerlifting lifts and the powerlifting sport to the CrossFit community. He has over 20 years of coaching experience, having coached athletes across most major league sports at a very high level, and he's taking his technical expertise and bringing it to the masses within the CrossFit space as well. I took a little bit of a back seat in this conversation because I knew Chad had a ton that he wanted to ask in terms of parallels between weightlifting on the Olympic side versus powerlifting, some of the things that most people who are unfamiliar with both worlds would ask, and how we can actually merge those two worlds and make each of them better. It was great to talk with Jesse. He has a very similar perspective on training, on methodology, on technique as we do, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this one.
Hey, Jesse, man, I've been hearing your name basically throughout my entire weightlifting career. Even though I'm an Olympic lifter and you're a power lifter, that name was always floating around. So I'm definitely excited to get to know you today, to meet you for the first time and chat a little bit. Thank you for joining us.
Likewise, Chad, thank you guys for having me. It's these are always such a blast to get some like-minded individuals around and get to hang out and talk shop, dude. It's always so fun, and I'm pumped to be here. I've heard, of Power Monkey and and your name equally same. So
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you said like-minded, because I've felt like through my career, power lifters and Olympic lifters perhaps butted heads a little bit, but I think maybe that was more so just my perception, because I always usually got confused as a power lifter. So anytime I said, somebody saw my build, they're like, "Oh, hey, you're a power lifter." Or if I said I'm a weightlifter, they ask how much I bench pressed and that kind of thing. I was like, "Well, I don't bench press. I snatch and clean and jerk." And that was a whole long conversation to explain all that stuff. But through your career, I'm curious, because I was always confused as a power lifter. Were you ever confused as an Olympic lifter?
100%. It's crazy that you got mistaken for a power lifter, because we get mistaken as Olympic lifters. Like, oh, you're a power lifter. It's like, oh, that's the one where you do this thing over the top. Like, no, we're just meatheads and we just bench press and stuff. But to your first point about us, power lifters and Olympic lifters kind of butting heads, I think in the start of things, I think that we were fighting for attention, like this much attention. So there was any power lifter, any Olympic lifter who had any attention, we hated the person who had it, because the audience was only tuned into them, because our audience was approximately 16 people. So with the advent of CrossFit and Olympic lifting and powerlifting kind of blowing up, now our audience is much bigger, and we're all kind of getting together and chatting and realizing how cool everybody is, and that we wish we could have done this a long time ago. But absolutely 100% like, oh, you're an Olympic lifter. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, just that's
That's fine.
right.
Yeah. No,
It's not even worth the explanation. It's just like, the nuance that, you know, you and I can chat about, the differences between Olympic lifting and all the things, right, that make us unique. The person doesn't fucking care. They don't know.
Right. Yeah. Next time I'm just going to say, how much do I bench? Oh, 1,000, you know,
there you go.
Easy 1,000 pounds. But
you know what, people, it's oftentimes, even like in the CrossFit realm, people will just throw things out. And I do try to fuck with people. It's like, I said something the other day, at the CrossFit games. I was like, you guys don't even know I'm the only person with the a perfect score on Fran. It was like 100. I got 100% on Fran. They're like,
there you go.
Like, what the fuck does that mean? I was like, it means whatever you want it to mean. It doesn't matter. It's exactly what it means. So
that's a great new goal for me right there, to get 100% on Fran. I'm going to try that as soon as
100%, buddy. I'll coach you through it. You just give me a call.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get on Zoom and get that done real quick. But I agree with absolutely everything you said. And it's funny how you explain that, because I was absolutely 100% jealous of powerlifters in general, because we felt like on our side that you guys were getting all of the attention, or more of the attention. So it's crazy to hear you say that y'all felt the same way. I honestly never heard that, or never would have expected that. But talking about people confusing these two sports, and by the way, Dave, you can just go ahead and click out of here. Jesse and I are
I'm gonna mute myself. Mute myself.
We don't,
worthless.
I was never confused as a gymnast. I don't think, maybe, but not that and I'm sure that you weren't either, Jesse, for sure. But
no, sir, not at all.
You know, talking about being confused and people not really, in general, not knowing the difference. Now, so many more people do these days, because CrossFit has, you know, spread that knowledge quite a bit more. They understand that you can't really compare. Of people used to ask what my American record was. I said I clean and jerked 190 kilos. Well, how much is that? That's 418 pounds. Well, I know somebody that can bench press that. So they weren't impressed, because somebody else, you know, and so but now they understand the difference in the difficulty. And I wonder, from your perspective, aside from the obvious of snatch and clean and jerk versus bench, squat, and deadlift, what are the basic differences of a power lifter and an Olympic lifter?
Well, I think Louis said this really, really early on. I think, you know, the names of our sports are almost backwards. You know, you guys are all about power output, and you guys should be the power lifters, and we should be named something else. You know what I mean? It doesn't even matter what we're really named, because the qualities of what we're doing is quite different. The main difference is, you know, it's powerlifters are, you know, just overgrown meatheads, and we just want to put the biggest amount of weight on the bar, right? And oftentimes we don't care what it looks like, how it got there. If it gets from point A to point B, we get the lights, and that's cool. Where you guys, I always look at it as much more of a sport, because of the technique. That, like, there's always, you know, there's efficiency and technique in the squat, bench, deadlift for sure. And as you get higher and higher, and you want to, you know, execute these lifts with heavier and heavier weights, but just the athleticism that it does take to be an Olympic lifter. You don't have to be able to touch your fucking toes to be a good power lifter. Right. But if you can't get into a deep squat, you're probably not going to be able to clean and jerk and snatch as well as you really should be. And then, you know, we always have the caveat, unless, you know, you're like someone like Jamerkin and you're 400 some odd pounds. It doesn't matter, just because you're so brutally strong. But you look at you know, you look at some of the best people, the best Olympic lifters, you know, they move like ballerinas. You know, they're able to do things that are just, you know, a normal power lifter, even the best power lifter, probably doesn't have the mobility and, you know, in order to do so. We don't want to break parallel, but by that much, you know what I mean? You guys need to get as low as you can to, you know, initiate a catch in one of the lifts, and in order to have that power output to go from there. So, you know, I don't know, I'd probably get people are going to hate me for saying that, but I always thought of Olympic lifters as such more of an athletic, you know, very technique driven sport, where powerlifting was just like, just 5 more pounds, man, let's put it on. And well, what if, like, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I tell you what, I've got a new friend. You could be my best friend easily. And I am going to have to let Dave ask a few questions here in a minute. And the only reason why is because he actually beat me in a deadlift workout not too long ago, which it was a CrossFit workout.
It's no big deal.
So, no big deal. You know, don't worry about it. I thought for sure. I mean, it was 185 pounds, but normally I can beat him with anything with
Yeah, anything over 135, I'm out.
anything at 135, I normally beat him, but he crushed
That's
me.
pounds too.
But
Yes.
but
But I will say, like, you know, like speaking of CrossFit, and, you know, a lot of us are, you know, at the position we're at because of CrossFit. And, you know, the best description of CrossFit that I've ever heard is it's, you know, a gateway drug for, you know, for the barbell sports, right? And, you know, I've gone to really gone on to really appreciate, you know, the athleticism and the strength of gymnasts, you know. I mean, and when a gymnast comes into the gym and says, hey, can you teach me how to squat, bench, deadlift, whatever, I'm like, this is easy. You guys know how to move. I don't have to put you in positions. You're super coachable. And, you know, because you've been doing this since you've been 6 years old by some, you know, Russian guy who's smoking and yelling at you at the same time. So it's super easy.
You've done it too, huh?
Coachable. It's like, do everything, just do it better, okay? And
Yes.
you're like, oh, great. You're like, why are you yelling at my 6-year-old? Like, you just flicked ash on him. You know, so I mean, gymnasts are like the best clients possible to have, you know. So I mean, it's really gone on to, you know, CrossFit has helped out people who are interested in, you know, physicality, and we've introduced each other to each other. And, you know, I'm just consistently and always impressed with, you know, all the Olympic lifters and the mindset of you guys, and the same thing with gymnasts. And it's, you know, it's finally cool that we can, you know, we can all party together. It's pretty great.
I appreciate you saying that, Jesse. Chad, you mind if I just jump in really quickly and ask one thing?
Yeah, I was just gonna say we could have gone without those last few comments on.
I was gonna say, yeah,
gymnastics, but yeah,
hey,
go
my
ahead,
best
Dave.
friend now too.
Hey, see, we're all friends. That's good.
But I'm curious, after saying something like that, and you saying, you know, gymnasts come in, they have a good base for basically, it's one of the things that we preach, you know, doing gymnastics early on doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go on to be a gymnast. It can be a fantastic foundation for Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting or anything. I'm curious, after working with potential, you know, gymnasts who did it growing up, if you found any benefit in saying, hey, if I incorporate a little bit of what gymnasts are good at into my powerlifting training or my own training or the way that I teach, would you see benefit in the techniques or gaining more mobility? And you're saying, you know, powerlifters have a tough time touching their toes, and we're just about putting 5 more pounds on the bar and just whatever happens, happens. Has mentality changed a little bit after seeing the emphasis of technique, maybe in Olympic weightlifting or in gymnastics from the CrossFit world, and maybe changing the approach to way that powerlifting is now being kind of done into the future and the way that you're doing it now versus how it was done in the past?
Yeah, I think there's, and again, we can point to a couple of like real transitions in kind of the history of powerlifting. You know, it was, for the longest time, it was ruled by the biggest, most giant dinosaurs that you could find. And eventually what ended up happening, you know, and we were in a ton of gear, and, you know, what ended up happening was we were like, oh, hey, there's these kind of like smaller, lighter guys who are in like the 220, 242 realm. We're really coming close to what the super heavyweights are lifting. Like, who are these people? How are they doing it? They look awesome. They got like, you know, 6-pack. They're walking around with their shirts off, you know, and they just look awesome. So people started to look at it and be like, maybe because the whole thing was just get fucking huge. You know, I used to have a shirt that just said get fucking huge, and that was it. It was, you know, put on 10 more pounds, you're going to lift 10 more pounds. Like that was the whole thing. And there was a whole group of us who were, you know, like 330 pounds, and we couldn't move, and we're getting passed up and outworked by this person who's 220 pounds, and they're doing equal, if not more. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And for me, that person who really, really changed everything in powerlifting was Dan Green. Dan Green came in with a 6-pack, and he was a former gymnast cheerleader, came in and just started blowing everybody away. And like, what is going on? So I think that was a real big kind of transition into the fact, like, you don't have to be a fat fuck to be strong. And, you know, some of the methodologies changed, and you could be a little bit healthier, and you could be a little bit more mobile. And then you started to see that it wasn't, you know, the weight on the bar or the weight on your body didn't always necessarily equal weight on the bar. You know, we always used to thought it was like the more weight you have, the better leverage is. And that's not necessarily true, right? So it became a little bit more of an efficiency game. And you could think about like, well, if I'm 330 pounds and 20% body fat, like I might as well just be 240 pounds and shredded, right? I mean, why the fuck not? So that started to change. But I mean, to your initial point, I mean, anybody that I work with, any kids that I work with, I have stolen so much so very personally, my daughters who are now 15, that was the first thing that we did was gymnastics and tumbling and everything. That was the first thing I wanted them to do, was to find out how to understand how to move their body through space. And if we can do that, they can do anything. I mean, they're now, national level volleyball and softball players at this point. So they're, I think by the time that they were 6 years old, they were too big to be a gymnast. So, but no offense, but it is. So it gave them an incredible foundation, and maybe gymnast and I mean the advent of kind of like the Ninja Warrior type of stuff, like tumbling, Ninja Warrior, like, and even MMA or just some sort of martial arts. If you can learn how to move your body through space, you have such a leg up on everybody. So as a coach, especially as dealing with younger kids, something that I always kind of push them into, hey, when should my kid lift? Hey, what this? Like, don't worry about it. Just get them to move and go from there. But as I'm getting kind of the high school kids in and some of the people who are trying to ascend in a sport, whatever that is, I steal a lot. And I think one of the biggest deal is gymnasts' understanding of how to move their bodies. They have such a great proprioception of where their toes are, what their toes are doing, where their hands are, elbows, all this other stuff. And in order to teach that, you just got to teach kids how to move. I'd actually just, I'm dealing with like probably 18 baseball players right now, and a bunch of them are coming in the mornings. We do this extensive movement warm up, and I always try and put something in there that kids are like, what the fuck is this? And we did crab crawls. So 2 weeks worth of crab crawls. We do some bear crawls and we do some crab crawls. And they're like, this crab crawl stuff is impossible. I was like, no, it's not impossible. You just don't understand that movement. It's such a weird thing for you guys. I was like, but just wait. If you're an athlete, 3 days later, 3 times through, they're like, oh, this crab crawl shit's easy. And you're like, okay, cool. So there's this inherent understanding in our body and in our brain that we want to move and we want to experience different movement in different ways. And I think very much too often, we just stay in our lane. And if we introduce just a little bit of, difference, just a little bit of play and make it a little bit weird, the responses that I'm getting is just remarkable. These kids are really starting to understand stuff, and they take cues so much better. And whether they're, in the box or on the mound or whatever it is that they're ended up doing, they're so much more coachable because a lot of the coaches are using certain cues. Hey, your elbow here, elbow this, swing this hand, blah, blah, blah. If they can understand themselves about how to move differently, all of a sudden they're a better athlete like that. And all it takes is just a little bit of a play. And I think, it just accelerates the process so much for those kids.
I mean, I have my take home point there is make sure everybody starts gymnastics. I mean, Chad, I think you would agree there that gymnastics before weightlifting.
Well, how about at the same time? How about all three, powerlifting, weightlifting, and gymnastics? But a little bit at the same time, and that kind of goes along with one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and kind of what you're explaining there, Jesse, is being less specific. And what I mean by that is I was way too specific with the snatch and clean and jerk for way too many years. And in my opinion, looking back, I can easily see that I should have been doing more powerlifting and gymnastics. Absolutely. I wish I would have gone through phases of sumo deadlifts, for example, just because it was a movement that I'd never done and I could have benefited from that difference. And I wrote a blog not too long ago on basically something I want to talk about as well as the deadlift, but deadlifts in CrossFit, what is the difference in conventional deadlift and snatch and clean deadlift? How should CrossFitters approach doing conventional deadlifts and the Olympic lifts in their training? And should powerlifters do any Olympic lifting in their training and vice versa? And so that's what I want to ask you is, from your perspective, if you're working with a sport specific powerlifter, do you think that they should be or could be doing any Olympic lifting? And even if it's just something that Olympic lifters do, like full depth squats versus a powerlifting squat, and then vice versa as well, should Olympic lifters be doing bench press, for example, to assist their training?
So it's a very nuanced question, and it's a really worthy one to answer, and it may take a little bit of time for us to kind of work through all that, because it's not a The answer really is it depends, right?
Yep.
So let's take it from the powerlifting perspective. From the development of a powerlifter, if they're not necessarily like really in kind of a competitive window for themselves, whatever that ends up looking like, and they're just developing, they're just starting to kind of get strong and just starting to figure out. I think that pieces of an Olympic lifting program can certainly be thrown in there. Someone who has influenced my program immensely is Max Ada. He was when he stopped Olympic lifting, he started powerlifting with me, and we would have, and he was my training partner for a very long time, and we would have talks about, what to add here and there and stuff. And I took a lot from him, and I really enjoyed being able to kind of piece things together. And something that I use to this day is kind of a high bar, close stance, beltless squat, which is a very Olympic lifting thing. And that's something that I cycle in, and I cycle it very much off of where he learned it from, which was from Uncle Abujayev. And, we're doing, max sets of 10 and then a 90%, and we're doing 4 sets of 10 at 90%, which is just fucking brutal, right? I mean, you guys used to do that, at the OTC or with Abujayev. You're doing that every week, where you're doing, max a set of 10 and then a set of 8, 6, 4, etc., plus the 90%. And then you get to, you lucky you get to go ahead and throw some stuff over your head after that. So that's something that I've taken in there and added in. If we're talking about like an actual competitive powerlifter, I think it'd be difficult, mostly because of the lack of range of motion and the technique that you would need to gain something from, like a clean, a jerk, or a clean or a snatch, right? So I think someone who's in a competitive window as a powerlifter, not necessarily so much. You can do those kind of high bar, close stance, some squats. You can do some of the other, assistant movements. I think I'm a big proponent of doing overhead stuff as a powerlifter. That's something that, was something that made me unique as well. It just so happened that I was really good at it, so I like doing that, and I gave it to all my clients as well, and my lifters. So if someone's developing and they have the technique and they have the background, I think it's great, and I think it's something that can definitely use. Keep it fun, keep it fresh. But to try to teach an older competitive powerlifter a clean and jerk and a snatch, it would just have to be something that they're just trying to experience and just have fun with. I don't know how much it will actually take and make their power lifts a lot better. Now, on the other side, an Olympic lifter, should you guys be deadlifting? Should you be doing that? And the answer there is a really easy yes. And the reason for that is, if we look into the past history of, Russian, Bulgarian, et cetera, they're using kind of like powerlifting mentality stuff of their squats and their deadlifts. I mean, the Russians deadlifted heavy almost every session before they started throwing stuff over there. I think, yes, they should be doing that. Should they bench press? I think so, only because just for variety, putting stuff over your head all the time, and especially all the jarring aspects of the shoulder that you guys get. If you could take the time and not push overhead and just bench press and get your arms strong, there's no way that doesn't positively influence your overhead press, clean, jerk balance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's room for all of it. The teaching aspects, you guys already know how to move. You guys already deadlift. You guys already squat. A sumo deadlift, would be a nice thing for you guys to kind of deload or have a little bit of fun with. But it's a little bit harder to teach something so much more technique driven to someone who is just very much in a silo of powerlifting, unless it was, we're just going to kind of throw this around and play.
Right. And the best answer, or what I took from that most, which I agree with, is it depends.
Yes.
So, it absolutely depends. If I have an Olympic lifter or someone that's competing in Olympic lifting, and for whatever reason they have bad overhead mobility, I'm probably not going to have them bench press,
right?
At least initially, until they can open that up a little bit, which is, I think the reason why we tend to stay away from bench presses as weightlifters, even though it's not legitimate. As long as we have overhead mobility and we're throwing the bar overhead all the time, we're going to maintain that mobility. So I like the idea of potentially bench pressing there as well. Now, getting into, we talked about Olympic lifters doing powerlifting and vice versa. There's an option there. So you have the option as an Olympic lifter or a power lifter to do some stuff from one of those other sports, and maybe we should all do something from one of those other areas. And again, depending on what our issues are, although there are other movements that we could do. As an Olympic lifter, I could do something different than a sumo deadlift to kind of work my body in a similar way. But in CrossFit, you're going to do everything anyways. You're going to do, powerlifting, you're going to do Olympic lifting, you're going to do gymnastics, you're going to run, you're going to do a lot of things, and you're going to do a lot of it. And so being that we all work with people in the CrossFit community and people that have come through CrossFit, I know you've seen so many CrossFit athletes or worked with so many CrossFit athletes, whether they're everyday CrossFitters or elite CrossFitters. What is the one thing that, from your perspective, they don't get right? And if you want to specifically go ahead and get into the deadlift, we can. So specifically for the deadlift, and maybe go ahead and answer that too, but specifically for the deadlift, what do they do most wrong most of the time? What is their misunderstanding or misconception there? Or if there's something else powerlifting related that you feel like they're off on?
So it's a couple of questions, and again, really big, good questions. So I would answer the first question of what do CrossFitters get, or what do they leave out? Let's not say it wrong, right? Because it's not necessarily wrong, because these guys are savage athletes. They're doing stuff that none of us thought that anybody could do 10, 15 years ago. So let's give them some dap. Let's give them some credit for that. But having gone through that and having been on this ride for the past, 15 years with everybody, I think the one thing that we can correct, and, I'm actually getting to be a part of this correction here, is accessory movements. So often we see people come in, they do a little bit of a warm up, maybe they do some skill, they do the WOD of the day, they all high five and hug each other, and then they take off. There's nothing wrong with doing some curls, some tricep extensions, a little bit of delt raises, do some dumbbell bench press, do some lat pull downs, do something. Now, I know not every box has access to necessarily all of those, but most everybody has some bands and some dumbbells, and they can add in all this stuff. And whether the impetus and the reason for this is to just look better naked, or to not, go to the doctors because your shoulder hurts, something along those lines, the accessory movements, and I'm not talking, it's like 3 to 5 movements, maybe 25 reps each, super light. It doesn't have to be complicated. Test yourself, move some stuff around, gain some muscle, think about some hypertrophy work for yourself. So I think that's the one thing that we could add into a general CrossFit program and immediately benefit everybody for that sort of stuff. Something that they miss as far as like kind of a strength work aspects of things, I don't think that they touch 80% work, 80% loads, 80% plus loads as often as they should, as in general, right? Some of the guys who are, the top guys. So in general, the programming, I would say, we could, and it doesn't have to be one thing, but, you throw out, 10 things, and if you touch 2 of them, twice a week, that stuff really, really can keep you very, very strong at a maintenance level without having to go over 90-95%. So I think something in there would be good, whether it's a couple of singles here or there, a couple of triples here or there, a 5x5, something like that could really go a long way. And then we kind of come to kind of the deadlift, and this is, I think how I kind of got on here talking to Jordan when I was taking Rena through the deadlift when as part of the CrossFit Total. And I've done, I don't even know how many seminars for CrossFit, and I've got to travel across the country and do all this stuff. And the one thing that I see very, very often, and I do believe that the reason for this is a good thing, and I'm not bashing on the reason for this. The reason that these people have the deadlift setups that they have is because they're so concentrating on how to figure out how to clean and jerk and snatch, and the movement that they have and the setup that they have is almost always, a clean position. So everyone is starting to deadlift from a clean position, which doesn't necessarily make for a good deadlift. Now, there are people who deadlift from a clean position and deadlift massive amounts of weight, but we could clean up that efficiency and make them deadlift a little bit better. But will that make them a better Olympic lifter? That's kind of a question where we go, maybe, maybe not. But if we're going to separate movements, the deadlift has its own stance, the deadlift has its own setup, and the clean should have its own stance and its own setup. Because if I sent you a deadlifter, you'd be like, holy shit, we got to change so much to get you in a better position to clean. And it kind of goes the same way for, you know, someone who's setting up for an Olympic lift when they're powerlifting. They look really, really similar. But when you really start to kind of break it down and you show someone video and you start to ask them to kind of feel the individual, you know, differences, they're like, oh, a deadlift. I'm like, right, not a clean that you just don't, you know, actually bring up to your shoulders. So, you know, I think, again, a long-winded answer, sorry, but hopefully that'll, you know, spark some conversation, at least answer somewhat of the question.
Yeah, for sure. And they are different movements. Definitely, you know, one, the goal is to just, I don't want to say simply, it's not simple, but to simply stand up to get to a standing position with as much weight as you can. And with the clean,
Yeah.
you've got to move it to your front rack, squat underneath and stand up. And then overhead for the snatch, you got to move it through that standing position and squat underneath. But I think one of the part of the problem with that is Olympic lifting shoes as well. It's not easy or ideal to get into a good conventional deadlift setup position. I mean, at least from what I feel and what I see, you know, in an Olympic lifting shoe that has that raised heel, you need to be, I would say, barefoot. I feel much more comfortable in a conventional setup if I'm barefoot or flat footed. And even for the CrossFitters that are wearing nanos, to me, those aren't, you know, great and ideal either to really help you lift as much weight as you possibly can.
Chad, before you move on from there, can you explain that a little bit? Does it just push you forward too much on a conventional deadlift than what you would be using for a clean? Can you explain the difference, saying like, hey, you know, we stress the benefits of using a lifter, but in this case you wouldn't use it. Can you explain why it might be a deficiency in that and the different variation?
Everything starts from the ground up. So if you're in an elevated shoe, especially as elevated as weightlifting shoes are, all of your angles are going to be different up from that point. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jesse, but in powerlifting with a conventional deadlift, you want your entire foot still buried and solid on the ground, but you are going to be a little bit more towards your heels. And the weightlifting shoe is going to, by nature, put you a little bit forward as a whole. So you're going to have to compensate for that and be even further back and probably a little bit more off balance if you're in a truly really good conventional setup with Olympic lifting shoes on. Did you have anything to add to that, Jesse?
No, I agree with you very much. And I think, you know, there's always going to be individual differences, but if we look at what the movement looks like from the side, right? As a clean or a jerk, the bar is going to kind of go straight up, and then you're going to bring your hips to it, and then you kind of have that roundabout and it comes back to you. And what a lot of times what you're doing is you're actually trying to get your hips away from the bar so you can have a little bit more power going through the bar to get that to kind of turn up. Would we agree there, Chad?
Yeah. Yes.
So with a deadlift, you know, I always use the analogy of trying to deadlift in a phone book. You know, here, I don't want to see any sort of daylight. I don't need your hips to kick back this way, because if you're doing that, you've already suffered and you've kicked all your leg into here, and now you're trying to do a good morning with all this weight, and then you have a whole bunch of other stuff. Your lats are you're trying to reel it back in and keep it close. So oftentimes people will kick like this, and then the weight falls out this way, and they have no way to reel that back in. And so we are trying to be really, really efficient and not have a ton of. We want to stay here and then just almost sneakily get behind the bar. As soon as that weight starts to get past like mid shin, we want to shove our face behind the bar as fast as possible. You guys are teaching patience until you get to kind of mid thigh, and then you do your big explosion and you try and get your hips through. So you're trying to create power in a little bit of a different way. We want to create a lot of power off the ground and use our legs for this much, and then our hips for this much. And that's hopefully, you know, you're only deadlifting really this much when you really get down to it. Where Olympic lifts, sometimes, you know, you really need to create that power from your hips and from a different drive. I've only actually had one person that I put in heels to have them deadlift. And that was someone who just had the worst, quite possibly the worst possible mobility of all times. That was the only way he was able to get his knees like forward enough to actually be able to use his legs properly in a deadlift, which is really kind of saying a whole bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about a few surprising things that I learned about the deadlift when I was writing these blogs, because I was trying to come up with the best comparison possible. And some major misunderstandings and misconceptions stuck out to me. And I always felt a little bit, I didn't understand what was going on, what I was seeing in general in the community, and what was being taught in general for the conventional deadlift. And after I did my research and learned more about it, I understood why, because it wasn't really correct. Talking about going back for just a second, talking about CrossFitters in general, their deadlifts look more like cleans. I would say that that's probably more on an elite level, because I mean, just from what I see, the general community, talking about your everyday CrossFitter that goes to the gym, they're not really competing or anything else like that. I feel like their snatch, their clean, and their deadlifts all look the same from the floor. And it's basically what it is a rounded back Romanian deadlift with the shoulders probably too far in front of the bar. So their deadlifts are rounded back Romanian deadlifts. Their snatches are rounded back Romanian deadlift muscle snatches, and their cleans are rounded back Romanian deadlift muscle cleans. And they're doing all of their reps like that, and they're just feeding one another. They're which is because the base of it is just getting to the hip from the floor. And so none of those are really what we want to see ideally for the snatch, for the clean, and then for the deadlift. So I really enjoyed digging into that and seeing what the differences should be, how they could be different. But one of the biggest things that stuck out to me is my understanding, and what I was hearing being taught is that the hips in general need to be higher than they would be in the Olympic lifts. The shoulders need to be further in front of the bar than they would be in the Olympic lifts. And what I learned, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, because I didn't learn it from you. I learned it from some other powerlifters, and looking at world record deadlifts and as many different videos as I could find. I actually realized that the shoulders should be, and when I say shoulder, it's very vast. The shoulder is very vast, but I'm talking about looking directly from the side. The contour of the shoulder, the rounded contour of the shoulder, should be at least slightly further back in relation to the bar than in the Olympic list, depending on what start position you're using in the Olympic list. But the start position that most elite Olympic lifters use is really one that puts the back of the contour of the shoulder directly in line with the bar. And in general, and I'm interested to hear your perspective, what I learned is that for powerlifting, it should be slightly further back than that. The marker that I was given was the spine of the scapula, which in general puts the contour of the shoulder not necessarily right in the middle of it, but closer to the middle, a little bit further back. And I was just, my mind was blown with that, because all these years I'm thinking, man, these guys are teaching these athletes to deadlift. Your shoulders need to be further in front of the bar. Your hips need to be higher, and your hips need to be higher in the deadlift versus a clean, and especially the snatch, because your hands are more narrow. Your entire body is higher, not because your back angle has less of an angle. There, you look at elite powerlifters, and they've got a very upright, or I mean, depending on who you are and what you consider upright, they have a very upright torso. And when I set myself up in a conventional deadlift, from what I was taught, my back angle is almost a match of what my snatch and clean are. But it's just there are different things going on. My stance is more narrow. My hands are more narrow. My knees are more narrow because I can't open them up with that wide snatch grip and clean grip. But what would you say to that shoulder alignment and those slight differences between those two tasks?
So I think it's really important. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, and this is a really well thought out and well researched bit that you kind of just went through there. So I think good for you for A, being curious about it, B, not just saying like, well, fuck this, I'm strong enough, because you are. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. There are subtle differences in all these stuff, and I mean, we can always make somebody more efficient in whatever we end up doing. So but to answer the question about if we're looking at the side of someone, from the sideways, they're looking this way, we're looking on, primarily, and my cue to help people kind of start to figure this out is, I always think, almost in general, we can argue about this, and whoever wants to, at Jesse Burdick everywhere. So let's go. people need to, for a conventional deadlift, move their feet in. And when that happens, the hips kind of correct themselves down, and that back, you're able to articulate getting your back up a little bit more, which is exactly what you're kind of talking about. Opposed to being a little bit bent over because your feet are a little bit wider and also your hands are a little bit wider for the snatch and for a clean and jerk. So once we figure out that we narrow everything, we bring our hands a little bit, we're able to articulate that chest up. Therefore, we go ahead and get a little bit more upright posture. Something else that needs to be kind of talked about is if we look at someone like Konstantin Konstantinov, who's I think his record was finally broken, but he held the all-time world record for close to 10 years before he passed away a couple years ago. He had a very, very rounded back when he would pull, and then he would kind of come up and snap through. So you can often have a little bit of a, let's call it soft, upper back, because what we're trying to do is we're really, really just allowing our lats to sit, our shoulder girdle to kind of sit into our lats, which is going to round our shoulders over a little bit. And the reason for that is we're fucking cheating and trying to cheat every inch that we can. If our shoulders are up here, guess what? That's 2 or 3 more inches. We got to move 800 pounds. And if we can only move it, if we can move it this much less, we're going to find every possible way in order to do so. So if we look at the upper back setup of a lot of Olympic lifters to powerlifters, I would say that would be the biggest thing, because we're trying to hold our lats down, which just basically shrinks, makes our shoulders look really, really rounded and depressed as we're kind of bringing that bar up, where you guys have to hold that back because they need to be under tension the whole time, because you're going to go snap, you're going to overhead, or you're going to have to catch it here. And to take something, to take a muscular group or a joint and have it unloaded to loaded, if you're not set up and ready for that, all sorts of stuff can kind of go wrong. So I would say, the stance, and then also the fact that we are literally trying to let our shoulders relax and just be all lats and grip is our upper body, and trying to keep our back straight as we can. And if we get this, we'll correct it at the top, because we're going to try and throw our back or our face. Okay.
Yeah, I love that. And I never really heard it say that way. You're rounding in your upper back because you're cheating. So thank you for being honest with that. But no, and that makes even more.
I say it all the time, man. I say it all the time. Like, why should people listen to a big fat powerlifter? It's because we can make you as efficient as possible. What is efficiency really? We're trying to move the bar as little as amount as possible and put the most amount of weight on. So I'm a big old cheater, and I'm going to find the best ways to go from point A to point B. And if you don't think that running from point A to point B, clean and jerking, even gymnastics or anything else, if we can find a better way to get you from one point to the other, that's it. That's a win. Whether that's in our sports or if in that, that's in football. In football, that's 7 points, dude. And that's a huge thing. And that's billions of dollars right there. So, efficiency, whether, it's, us rounding our shoulders to get a deadlift, or whatever, area, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying to get us to be a better whatever, we found it. We found it over and over and over again. And, that's what we do really, really well. And that's why I get along so well with the gymnastics community. Someone like Chris Hinshaw, someone like Kelly Surratt, is because we speak the same language, because it's body efficiency, and it's we're very, very critical of movement. We're doctors of movement. And when the 300-pound guy says something like that, they're like, wait a second, why do you know this? Why do you care? It's like, well, because I can deadlift more, not because I can touch my toes or do a backflip. It's just efficiency and movement is a common language in all high level athletics. And I think too many people kind of poo-poo that or whatever. But hey, man, I'm no shame in the game whatsoever. I will cheat my way to the biggest deadlift possible, and I will help you cheat your way to the biggest deadlift possible as well.
Nice. Well, and all those little things can be taught. And that's why it's so beautiful that all these experts are coming together within the CrossFit community to learn all those little tricks. And all those little quote unquote tricks were things that really the elite athletes figured out on their own, through years. Hey, my body is doing this, even though I was taught something different. It's not right, or is it right? So I love those little those little things that I call it when I talk about Olympic lifting, I call it the reality of Olympic lifting.
Right.
The reality is that if you're snatching and clean and jerking as much weight as you possibly can, as you're capable of, and you've been doing it for years, your body is going to do these things. It's going to need to do these things. So let's teach you how to do those in the first place. And, whenever I was getting set up in the conventional deadlift, what I had the hardest problem with was setting my back in the way that the coach wanted me to, because I thought I was had a flat back, but my back is arched. As an Olympic lifter, I arch my back. And is that wrong? Not necessarily. It's okay, because one, it exaggerates the engagement in my hamstrings and my posterior chain for what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to move fast from the knee up to the extension position and essentially jump with the weight. And with the weights that I'm lifting as an Olympic lifter that I'm snatching and cleaning, I can maintain the arch. If I'm deadlifting as much as I can, I'm probably not going to be able to maintain that arch. But where I thought I was flat, I wasn't. So one thing that I'm interested in and that I've been working on a little bit is learning to engage more like a power lifter. And why? Just because I'm curious, but also because I think if I am having trouble doing something as an athlete, if I can learn to do it, I'm going to be a better, more capable overall athlete.
And a better capable, coach as well. So, I mean, good for you for trying to figure stuff out.
Absolutely. And now what I'm curious about is, because when Dave and I did this deadlift workout that he beat me in, I hadn't been as researched with the deadlift so far. So Dave, were you using these efficient techniques in that workout?
Of course, I did all my research before I kicked your ass. That's exactly how.
There you go. Now we know why.
Well, I'm curious, Jesse. I mean, I know you're at the CrossFit Games. I didn't get a chance to run into you, but this year was kind of interesting, having Boz as the new programmer of the games, and there was a lot of talk about all of the new movements that were introduced. A lot on the gymnastics side, whether that be pirouetting in the handstand or the P-bar traverse or the new variation with handstand push-ups. A lot of new things that Boz brought to the equation, and we saw some strongman events too with the heavy sandbag ladder and some differences from what the athlete would normally see in a regular box. I'm curious, one, what you thought about kind of some of the new nuance and changes, but then also, is there anything that you'd like to see from the powerlifting side that might be programmed not only into potential games at the elite level, but even that we might be able to see at the open level that the everyday athlete might be able to kind of incorporate from the powerlifting side?
I've known Boz for a very long time, and I'm very lucky to call him a friend. And I thought he did a great job. Not only on challenge the athletes in a new way, but also the visual aspects of the sandbag ladder, where everyone kind of crowded around them as they're going up the stairs. They're like, dude, that was awesome. How could you not be so fucking pumped about that whole thing? That was so cool.
Mm-hmm.
So he did a really good job of not just thinking of things from, how am I going to fuck these dudes up with this new thing, about how it visually looked and how a crowd would react to these things. I think people don't take into consideration what he and Dave really talk about and what they go through and what they're thinking about it. I've been lucky to be a fly on the wall to hear him and Dave talk about, what they thought was good, what they thought was bad, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to get from the crowd. They want that race at the end, all these other things. And you go, oh man, it's like the general public saying like, oh, CrossFit's just, throw a bunch of shit on the whiteboard and there you go. It's like there's so much deeper of an understanding. They are trying to put on a fucking show. I thought Adrian did an amazing job taking, the reins from Dave. And I thought he got to turn that up a little bit and kind of throw a little bit of a nice spin on, kind of his personality, and kind of threw that in there. So I was really impressed with Boz and just the crowd engagement and, how the athletes were able to kind of go through things. I thought it was great. I would always, Mark and I would always talk to Dave about it, like, oh, you just got to throw a powerlifting meet in the middle of the games. And the reality of the situation, and Chad, you can relate to this too, man. Olympic lifting meets and powerlifting meets are the most boring fucking things that you can ever do, right? And I've been on the forefront of, live streaming these events for 10 years. And I've never charged for the live stream. I've never charged a person to ever come into the gym or any facility that I had to watch a powerlifting meet. It was all free. And the reason is this, is I could never justify, and I hated when I had to do this, give my mom or my dad or have them pay $25, $30, $50 to watch it online. And for what? Dude, I'm on the platform for 90 seconds over a 6-hour period. How boring and disgusting is that? I hated that about it. So from a CrossFit Games side of things, you know, putting a powerlifting meet in the middle of that would be so boring. That'd be awful. But the things that they used, I think they did it at the ranch where they did the deadlift ladder. That stuff is awesome. That stuff is really, really cool. You know, I think they did a little bit of a squat ladder, like a front squat ladder at like one of the, you know, regionals before they cut regionals. And they actually had some bench pressing, and I was just impressed that they included that. You know what I mean? And it was something that they had in there just to see if people could do it. And surprisingly, well, not really surprisingly, because you know that athletes, you know, that are at the top level, they did really, really well with it. You know, I think in the beginning, everyone was like, "Oh, if you throw a powerlifting meet in there, it'll fuck everybody up." It's like, well, you know, too bad for us, it didn't at all. And you know, from the Olympic side of thing, they've always had the clean ladder and a snatch ladder and stuff. Like, that's the only way to make our sport, Chad, exciting, is to do something like that, where there's a bunch of bars, load it up, you have X amount of minutes, ready, go. Because you have to be a real sycophant fan to want to sit down and, you know, like, oh man, he just jumped him in order. Like, oh my gosh, how excited! Oh hey, how, you know, there's these weird nuances of our sport that no one understands except 4 of us. And you know, like, to a casual fan, to make that interesting and fun, I think CrossFit's done an amazing job of that. And as far as kind of the programming side of things, I think I would echo what I said before, where I think the general public, the general CrossFitters need to, and this is, again, it depends, right? It would be ideal if they're moving well, let them touch 80% weights a little bit more often. I think that would lead to greater things. And you know, the reality of the situation is the top athletes, they are touching those weights. And look, it's an impossible, you know, thing to try and program for 1 million people. It's just impossible, you know. And I think Leif and I think Dave and the whole crew that does that, they do an admirable job, and they do a very, very good job of it, you know, and that's why they're as successful as they are. So who am I to nitpick? But I mean, again, with the accessory stuff and a little bit heavier stuff, just in general, I think the public can kind of take that. I think generally they can take that. But when you can't literally physically touch all those people and you're counting on coaches who have 40 people in a class, bro, that gets really, really hard. So, you know, my hats off are always to those guys. I mean, I coach, you know, we coach up at the high school over here, and we have 40, maybe 60 kids at a time. And it's an impossible task. I'm just glad that nobody gets hurt and nothing gets sets on fire. And bro, that's a good session for me. You know what I mean? So as much as I would like to nitpick and say, hey, more heavy stuff, I understand the reality of the situation is you have 40, 60 people in a class at 6 a.m. and one coach. You know, I think they're doing their best. And I appreciate the fact that they do their best.
Yeah. Chad, this is an interesting part of the conversation. We had Pat Sherwood on the podcast a few weeks ago too, and we were talking about, well, he was mentioning how much he hates lifting heavy, 80% plus. And he's like, I try to take that out of my training as much as possible because I just hate doing it.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a conversation piece around exactly this topic of how much introduction should an athlete have on a regular basis? How much does an Olympic lifter like Chad, who's training for a competition, have those in his weekly training? And I think the difficult part, exactly what you're talking about, Jesse, is that as a CrossFitter, there are so many different things that the athlete's trying to become good at, that how do you fit it into the week appropriately and have a coach that can program this? Like, okay, I got to work on my gymnastic skills. I got to work on my kettlebell technique and make sure I'm proficient there. There's so many different areas that you have to be working on. Is how do I fit it in appropriately where it's not just haphazardly thrown in there, where I'm actually seeing the benefits rather than just saying, I'm going to do 80% this week on a lift, and then, you know, I'll come back to it 3 weeks from now.
Yeah, it's a very, very hard, you know, it's a very, very hard task. And, you know, and it's increasing, it's made hard even further because someone like Chad and someone like myself as we've ascended in our careers and in our strength, we can actually use less percentage and get more out of it. But the general public needs more heavy weight in order to be able to touch some of that stuff. So again, we're not programming for Chad and I, we're programming for your mom and, you know, for your aunt and for the, you know, the barista that you got your coffee from. And those people need just a lot of work, and they need a lot of reps, and they need those reps between 60 and 80% and 80% and above to really understand and kind of showcase the inefficiencies in their movement. And then you got to figure out what they need to do to fix those inefficiencies in order to make them kind of touch those things. So, you know, the programming is, the good gyms do this, right? Where either the owner or the coach or whomever is helping program, they will try to individualize as much of this as possible for their clients. But at a mass scale, it's really, really hard. And I mean, you know, I really enjoy Pat. But if you ever saw him lift, you would understand immediately why he doesn't want to touch 80%.
Yeah.
I hope he hears that, and Pat, give me a call. That's
we'll send it. Yeah, we'll send it to him. But yeah, it sounds like the answer, and what I would say the answer is as well is, again, it depends, you know, because if we're talking about the general CrossFitter, we have CrossFitters that come in 2 days a week, and we have CrossFitters that come in 5 or 6 days a week. Yeah. So their programming, I mean, if you really want to optimize, should be different. You know, the person that comes in twice a week is going to do the same 2 workouts, or 2 of the same workouts as the 5 or 6 day a week athlete. And it's going to be random as they go. And I'm sorry to use that word random, because it's not, you know, exactly what CrossFit is, but we need something a little bit more than random if we're only coming in twice a week, for example. So it really depends. And those people coming in 2 or 3 days a week, even though I love the idea of CrossFit programming being, say, you know, one day you come in and you just do 150 or 100 burpees or 7 minutes of burpees for time, and that's all you do, something body weight, or you run a 5K or something like that. And that's all well and good if the person is coming in 5 or 6 days a week, because likely they're still going to touch something at 80% or above 2 or 3 days of the week. But if you're coming in twice, you know, you probably need to be doing some sort of movement at 80% or above every single day, on top of getting that 5K in, or that 7 minutes of burpees. So
and doing all the gymnastic skill work and then, you know, trying to bulletproof yourself. And let's not forget that we are humans and we want to be good at shit. Our gym just programmed Jerry, which is a mile run, a mile row, and a mile run. You want to understand how showed up? 50% of the people showed up today. Okay. So you got to understand, people are cherry picking these workouts. If you think that they're not, you're out of your fucking mind. Yeah. So even though we know what these people need, they're going to tell us what they want. Right. And there's nothing we can do about it.
Right. It's interesting. I was listening to another podcast just yesterday. Dr. Andrew Huberman had Dr. Peter Attia on. And one of the things that they were specifically talking, Peter Attia was talking about the benefits of 80% lifting regularly was one of the metrics shown to be most beneficial to wellness and longevity in life. So even him from his line of work, being a physician, was saying that 80% lifts and strength building was a metric to be shown to be most beneficial across the board on the fitness side in terms of longevity. So aside from just performance-based stuff, it's also being shown to be a longevity-based factor as well. So a lot of benefits there to lifting
Chad,
heavy.
You could probably help me speak to this. Yeah, for a long time, I would, whenever I would program, whether it's for powerlifters or for athletes or anything, that 80% number, and it doesn't have to be an 80% maximum, it's just 80%. There's magic in there somewhere, and I don't necessarily always know why. But even if I'm, say, hey, it's a max triple today, and our drop down sets are, I want you to take 80% of that. So in theory, right, 3 reps should be about 90% of your, 1 rep max. And now I'm having you take 80% of that. So now it's like around 60, 70. It really doesn't matter what it is, but 80% that day. And I want you to do AMRAP sets. And that's something I've been doing for years. And I've seen such great progress from people. When I turn it up to 90%, people get fucking crushed. When I turn it down to 70, people are yawning because they're just doing way too many things. That 80% there, I don't understand why, but it's just enough to make you hate life and breathe a little bit heavy, and also have to try really, really hard and get you sore. So it kind of is that really, that Venn diagram, they all kind of meet in the middle there. That 80% is a really, really special part of things. And again, it's something that, I'm not going to claim that I invented it or whatever, but it's something I've been doing for a long, long time. And I really feel like it's been a very big part of my success, is having that 80%, because everyone can kind of do at least something. When you're asking for a max lift and then do 90% and you're going to do X, you're going to get people who are just like, bro, no way, I'm done, I'm out of here. And I mean, Chad could probably speak to that, where you're like, oh yeah, just clean and jerk as much as you can, then take 90% and do this is the Prilipin's chart, right? I just do 6 more reps with it. Like, bro, I got dinner in 4 hours. I don't know if I'm going to get there. Like, I got a date to go on. I'm not going to get this shit done. 80% seems to be like a really, really nice cruise spot to be. So that's kind of the reason why I stay 80%. And that's actually I just started to listen to that podcast myself, and I haven't got to that point. That makes me excited that people are kind of recognizing the magic in that spot.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I can just sit here thinking about what I do in general in my programming and what I've done through all the years. I mean, I can tell you that I get more out of 80% than 70 or 75. I get more out of 80% than 85 or 90%. Even typically on days when I go up and I'm going as heavy as I can, or as close to as heavy as I can on the snatch and clean and jerk, I'll usually always come down and do a cluster of 3 to 5 reps with, guess what, 80%, specifically of what I hit that day too. So it's not of my best or my current best, it's of what I was able to do with good quality and what was solid for me that day. Come down to that 80% and just get those extra reps in, and that extra work. It's, one, reps to help you maintain movement and technique, to get stronger, but also to recover. Those downsets are important as well. So I definitely love that number. One of my friends, Danny Camargo, you might know Danny, he says 83%. He has a specific number of 83% for whatever reason. And I don't remember if that's specifically for the snatch and clean and jerk. I think he was talking about for the snatch and clean and jerk, that's the percentage that he feels that athletes, you really have to think more. You have to turn it on a little bit more. Right. So, maybe in that sense, it's very true, because we're talking about 80% being something that you can be a little bit more comfortable with and for sure get in. So yeah, great number.
It's like just enough to make it serious, and you have to think about it, and you have to be involved, and you have to be concentrating on the moment, but not where you also have to go to that special dark place to make shit happen. You know what I mean? It's just like, you just got to peek into that door a little bit and be like, all right, I know that's there. And you can kind of go ahead and rep out. 83%, huh? That's see, my problem is I'm dealing with a bunch of people who don't know how to math very well. So 80% is sometimes even a hard ask for them. So to make it really specific, even though, I mean, we're holding a TI 55 calculator that has a phone and a camera attached to it, asking 83% of people might be a little bit much. Maybe just my population. Maybe he's dealing with some, really geniuses.
I agree, because I've given 50% before, just as a warm up. Hey, do 35%, then 50% will go on up. And I have had athletes come up to me and say, what's 50% of my max? I'm like, wait a minute. Isn't your max 100 kilos also? So how hard is it to divide 100 kilos into 2? But anyway, yeah.
It's amazing how lines and also the gym like just drops people's IQ. It's unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Being inverted upside down does the same thing. Trust me.
I can't imagine that's going to do much for an IQ either. But that would be really interesting. Maybe we need to think about that for the CrossFit Games. We need to have some sort of a math test after they do 150. We were talking about this, right, Jordan? Right, because we were talking about kind of jujitsu and how cerebral a lot of that stuff is, and how you got to turn off some of the physical stuff that's kind of happening and some of the pain that's happening and work your way through it. So Jordan, you're right on, man. We got to figure out a CrossFit math test.
I haven't seen Jordan that happen in a really long time. Jordan wants a math test in the next CrossFit Games.
You didn't see that mustache go that high for a while, huh?
Well, I think Jesse's just good at appealing to his audience, man. He got something for all of it.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, we don't want to take up too much more of your time. Really appreciate getting to know you a little bit more and getting to pick your brain on this stuff. Before we get you out of here, would you mind answering some quick questions for us?
Always, anything. Shoot.
All right, first one I think is easy. I think I know where we're going on this one, but
I don't know.
what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Talking about Olympic lifting as a sport specifically,
Olympic lifting or gymnastics?
Olympic lifting only because I can understand how those things happen. Some of the, I think maybe I'm more impressed by some of the gymnastics sex because, dude, this is like basically, yeah, I have a brother-in-law who's an astrophysicist. I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about, but I can appreciate the beauty and the fact that he's unbelievably smart. He is a professor at Stanford. So for gymnasts to like watch them move, I'm like, I don't know how to make that go. In Olympic lifting, I can understand how that goes, and it makes sense for me. So
fair enough.
I'm a little bit more in awe of the gymnasts and what they do, but I would say, point to Chad.
Fair enough.
I'll take the win. I'll take the win, even with the good comments there for gymnastics. I'll take the win.
Question number 2: any guests that you think we should have on the podcast that would be a great interview? Maybe someone that you deal with regularly, or a new person you've come across.
If you haven't had Max Ada on, Max and Joe Ada are amazing Olympic lifting coaches. When I started powerlifting and I got to be introduced to Max, like a whole world of knowledge really opened up for me. That guy, with the glasses, he looks like he's a fucking nerd, but that guy's really a fucking nerd. He knows his shit, and he has been around for a very, very long time, and he's got to be coached by some amazing coaches, and he's picked up these little tidbits, and he's also just a really good powerlifting coach, and he's just one of my favorite human beings. Him, and then, my best friend in the world is Mark Bell. If you haven't had Mark on, he is fantastic in all the ways of that he is fantastic. And, you never actually know where a conversation with Mark is going to go, which is part of the fun ride. So I would say certainly those two. And then my assistant coaches, Jeremy Avila or Tiff Wang, Tiny Tiff, are also really, really good people. They're up and coming, they're world record holding powerlifters. But they have really come a long, long way in coaching athletes and people in general. And they have a really nice look on the world, kind of a fresh new coach's eyes, opposed to our rugged, bloodshot coffee infused eyes. So it's always really nice to have that sort of a voice around.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for those suggestions.
Yeah, Max would be a great one.
I'll help you. I'll give you the contacts to all of them if you want too. So
perfect.
We'll get them.
Perfect.
And that'll keep us busy for the rest of the year right there. I like it. But I've always known Max as the Olympic lifter with the strongest back squat. Dude's incredibly strong. But
he's remarkable because you could like wake him up at 3:30 in the morning and say, go over to that bar, and it doesn't matter what's on it, and he's going to squat it, and it's going to look perfect, and then he's going to go right back to sleep. He's just remarkable. Absolutely, positively one of the best squatters I've ever seen. For
sure. Few more here. Any books you've come across recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Oh man, there's so many of them. I'm a pretty avid reader. I'm going to make this a caveat. I listen to a lot of books because I drive my girls around and I'm commuting a lot in the Bay Area. Right. So I use Audible a ton. And I've actually just started to at the CrossFit Games, I picked up like Terminal List, and it was like the first real book I read book, I read a lot of, studies and research and stuff, but actual book from cover to cover in a long time. If you'll allow me, I'll pull up my my Audible account, because there's a lot of stuff that I think is amazing. I think Lex Friedman's podcast, Andrew Huberman's podcast is remarkable. And depending on what people are really kind of looking for, I think for like mindset, either It Takes What It Takes or Getting to Neutral by Trevor Moab, which is fantastic. If you're really trying to be a little bit of a nerd, Undoctored by William Davis. He also wrote Wheat Belly. The Craving Mind, which is all about serotonin and dopamine and how our bodies react to that, how our mind goes.
Mm-hmm.
I Contain Multitudes by Ed Young, which was remarkable because it talks about your gut microbiome and how important that is, and how it's been developed over, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and how far away we think we are, but how much it resembles just like every other animal. It's pretty remarkable. If you want to really kind of blow your hair back and and look at the world with some really skeptical eyes, Empire of Pain, which is the story of the Sackler family, who is responsible for OxyContin and how that kind of got out there.
Yeah.
And I think it's what is it? Dope Sick is the
Dope Sick, yeah.
Dope Sick. So it's kind of the story behind Dope Sick, or a story that kind of traces Dope Sick as well, which is remarkable and awesome. I've gotten into some Dostoevsky, so I mean, Crime and Punishment, the brothers Karamazov. And I have some other just like kind of fiction, because I try and mix it up here and there. But if you want to be a real nerd, if you're into science fiction, the 3 Body Problem series was really, really good. And I'm kind of working my way through that. So I think that's probably enough. That'll keep people
yeah. I mean, hey, we finally asked the right person that question.
Absolutely.
That was so easy for him. That was the best answer that we've ever gotten on both of those questions. So thank you very much. But
I think it's important to we're such dorks and nerdy about all this stuff, right? And we can go on and on about back position and efficiencies and everything else. When we really get down to it, it's like, how do we get our message across to people?
Yeah.
And we got to figure out, what's going on between their ears, how they want to be taught, how they learn, how to communicate best with them, how to understand and empathize with what's going on, and how to affect the 23 hours of the day that we're not with them. If we can educate them how to recover, how to eat, how to, cold and light therapy, cold and hot therapy, all these other things. There's so many cool things that people could take advantage of. And if we can figure out ways to just, drop these little breadcrumbs, that's really, really important. And that doesn't come through a discussion of the angle of the hips on the deadlift opposed to this and that. Right. And I really think if you want to be a coach, and this isn't just a fucking summer job for you at 24-hour fitness, if this is your career, like, this stuff bothers me, dude. I can't sleep when athletes don't do well, and like, when people are having a bad day. Like, if this is who you are, if you're a coach, you got to figure out how to like relate to human beings and how to talk to them. So I mean, you really got to branch out and think, psychology, sociology, and then you can get really nerdy into chemistry and body chemistry there too. I think it's an important bit of coaching that gets really, really overlooked. And I think the more people do that, the better off the whole world's going to end up being, because, when we really come down to it, we are the people who can affect people's health the most, right? I mean, they're going to see us 1,000 times more than a doctor, right? Some answers, and we have the ability to positively affect these people. I think, the sky's the limit for us. And I think we limit ourselves too much, thinking we're just weightlifting or just
man, you're spot on. It is so easy to get trapped into just technique, and getting good at that and teaching that, and forgetting about all those other aspects. So thank you for that reminder. I'll take that in for myself. And anything you got coming up you want folks to know about, or where can they keep up with you?
You can keep up with me at Jesse Burdick on all socials. Since I've been back at the in the womb of CrossFit, we're going to hopefully get the SME stuff going back again. So hopefully those seminars will start to take place again. We are, the gym's running and we're good, even in Northern California, where somehow, restrictions are still around. But we're putting on meets here. We're trying to get things moving. All of our athletes are going. I don't have anything in particular coming up. I have a couple of other podcasts that, I'll be on, but, just keeping up with me on an Instagram or Twitter. I always do a question and answer on Wednesdays, Q&A Wednesdays. And, I really like interacting with, the general public and the coaches. But, there'll be a couple of really cool things that I'm in the process of putting together, and hopefully we can get some stuff out and I can get in front of people in the next, 6 months or so. So, but past that, I'm just going to be following my girls around and, watching volleyball and softball. So, if you're ever around there, you might see me at a field or at a gym too.
There you go. Well, those are the most important things for sure. And Jesse, man, it was an absolute pleasure to to meet you and to get to know you. Maybe we can bring you back on when you got some of those things a little bit more in place and get the word out a little bit more. But to our listeners, as always, guys, we very much appreciate you listening in. Be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness. Dave Durante and Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.